My name is Daphne Hale. I just turned 33. And last Christmas Eve, my brother-in-law let slip a secret so utterly toxic that it permanently incinerated the perfect reality my family had been living in. For 8 long years, my parents practically built a shrine to this man. He was the Ivy League investment banker, the managing director at a top-tier hedge fund, the golden boy who provided my older sister with a life of absolute luxury. And for those exact same 8 years, my parents relentlessly reminded me that I had ruined my potential because my husband restores antique timepieces with his bare hands instead of moving millions of dollars on Wall Street. What Alexander whispered to me on my parents' frozen patio, the heavy stench of scotch hot against my cheek, altered the trajectory of our entire bloodline. And because of the absolute carnage that unfolded at our dinner table just 3 hours later, my mother still struggles to look me in the eye. But if I had to go back, I would detonate that bomb all over again. Before I break down exactly what he confessed and how my sister finally escaped her gilded cage, do me a quick favor. Take 1 second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely resonate with stories like this. Also, drop a comment letting me know where in the world you are watching from and what your local time is. I love seeing who is spending their day with me. To make sense of the nightmare, I need to rewind to the very beginning. The Thanksgiving 8 years ago, when I introduced Samuel to my family. I can still feel the nervous tension in Samuel's hand as we walked up the sweeping driveway of my parents' suburban estate. He was carrying a fully restored 18th century French carriage clock, brass, and beveled glass. It represented over 3 months of meticulous, agonizing labor. Every gear had been cleaned by hand. Every spring had been recalibrated with surgical precision. It was not just a clock, it was a resurrection of something that had been left for dead. My mother, Helen, pulled open the heavy front door. Her practiced smile wavered the second her eyes landed on him. "You must be Samuel," she said, her eyes dropping to the antique clock. "Oh, how quaint." Alexander just bought Victoria a diamond tennis bracelet for their anniversary. It was featured in the society pages, you know. I felt Samuel's grip on my hand tighten for a fraction of a second before he smoothly let go. "It is an honor to meet you, Helen," he said warmly, his voice betraying none of the sting her words had clearly delivered. "I thought this piece might find a good home here." My father, Walter, appeared in the foyer. He shook Samuel's hand with the exact stiff hesitation you would use on a mechanic trying to overcharge you for a brake job. "So, clock repair," my dad stated bluntly, as though Samuel had just confessed to a minor crime. "Is there even a market for that anymore? I mean, everyone has a phone that tells time now. How are you planning to fund a retirement?" "A mortgage." Before Samuel could formulate a polite response, a sleek, black Porsche Panamera glided into the driveway. My sister, Victoria, emerged looking like a runway model in a tailored wool trench coat, her pristine blonde hair perfectly blown out, her diamond earrings catching the late afternoon light. Alexander stepped out behind her, tall, imposing, wearing a custom suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe for the past 5 years combined. My mother instantly completely transformed. "There they are." She shoved past us to wrap Victoria in a massive, theatrical hug. "Alexander, you look incredibly sharp. How is the firm? Are they making you a partner yet?" Alexander flashed a blinding, predatory smile, the kind that had probably closed 100 hostile takeovers. "We will be popping the champagne by April, Walter. The board is already drafting the announcement." My dad slapped Alexander's shoulder with the deep reverence of a man touching holy ground. "That is what I like to hear. That is my guy. That is how you build an empire." I quietly watched Samuel place his priceless carriage clock on a side table in the living room. Nobody brought it up for the rest of the evening. It sat there, ignored, a silent testament to the man my family had already decided was beneath them. But here is the bitter irony. 8 years later, that exact clock sits squarely on the mantel in my mother's private study. She winds it every single Sunday morning. But she has never, not once, possessed the humility to admit it is the most exquisite item in her home. That Thanksgiving was my first glimpse of the toxic hierarchy in my family. I just had no earthly idea how dark the roots grew, or the catastrophic price we would pay to finally rip them out. Let us skip to 2 weeks before last Christmas. I was standing in my kitchen, a phone pressed against my ear, staring out the window at Samuel. He was in his detached studio, carefully polishing the brass gears of a grandfather clock that had been commissioned by a historic estate in the Hudson Valley. The soft glow of his work lamp illuminated the dust motes floating around him. He looked peaceful. He looked exactly where he was supposed to be. "Did you see the listing?" My mother's voice chirped through the receiver, vibrating with a sickening level of pride. Alexander and Victoria just closed on a waterfront estate on Mercer Island. 6 bedrooms, Daphne. A private boat dock. They're hosting a New Year's Eve party that is going to be in all the society columns. "That is great, Mom," I replied flatly, my eyes still fixed on Samuel through the glass. It is not just great. It is the pinnacle of success. He is only 38 years old, and he is already a managing director. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how many men would kill for that kind of trajectory? She let the silence stretch, the calculated, heavy pause she always used before sliding the knife in. "I just really wish you had not settled, sweetheart. Samuel is a sweet boy, but you know you gave up your potential. You could have married someone who could give you this kind of life." I did not utter a word. What was the point of repeating the same defense I had offered 1,000 times? A tinkerer, Daphne. My youngest daughter married a blue-collar tinkerer who spends his days playing with old metal while her sister is married to a titan of industry. Through the glass pane of the workshop, Samuel paused. He looked up, his eyes locking onto mine. He had heard her. My phone's volume was too loud, or maybe my mother's sheer disappointment simply possessed a frequency that could penetrate glass. He did not show any anger. He just lowered his head and went back to polishing, his calloused hands moving with slow, heavy precision. Those were the exact hands my mother deemed unworthy of touching anything more valuable than a rusty hinge. "Are you okay?" he asked when he finally came inside, smelling of brass polish and sawdust and the faint, pleasant aroma of old wood. I nodded quickly, tucking my phone into my pocket. "Fine. Just Mom being Mom." We both knew I was lying. That night, the shadows on our bedroom ceiling felt suffocating. Samuel's breathing was deep and rhythmic beside me, though I knew he was faking sleep. His body was too still, too controlled. What my mother was completely oblivious to, what my entire family was blind to, was that Samuel had just secured a restoration contract for a historic estate in the English countryside that would make Alexander's annual bonus look like pocket change. The contract alone was worth more than the down payment on my parents' first house. But the money was not even the core issue. The core issue was this: I was deeply terrified that my constant silence was not keeping the peace. It was slowly executing my marriage. Every time I let a jab slide, I was carving a deeper canyon between us. The dynamic had to break. I just did not realize the breaking point was racing toward us, or how much collateral damage it would cause. Lying in the dark, my mind began compiling the grim statistics. 8 years of holiday gatherings where Samuel quietly retreated to the guest room earlier and earlier, claiming he was tired. 8 years of him never once suggesting we host my parents, not even for a casual dinner. 8 years of agonizing, silent car rides home, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles pulsing, his eyes fixed blankly on the highway lines stretching into the dark. I had constantly gaslit myself into believing our bond was bulletproof, that our love was insulated from my family's relentless disrespect. But contempt is like black mold. It grows in the dark, unseen, eating away at the foundation until one day the floor collapses beneath you. 6 months prior to that sleepless night, Samuel had asked me a question that still haunted me. We were just doing the dishes, entirely mundane, the radio playing softly in the background. He was drying a plate when he stopped scrubbing, the towel frozen in his hands. "Do you ever actually defend us when I am not in the room?" I froze, a damp towel clutched in my fists, the water dripping onto the linoleum floor. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I hear the passing comments. The little digs. The quaint and the cute and the oh, isn't that sweet." His voice was incredibly soft. Not furious. Just defeated. Hollowed out. And I never, ever hear your voice push back. I never hear you say, "Actually, Mom, he makes a very good living." I never hear you tell them to stop. I stumbled over my words, muttering some pathetic excuse about choosing my battles and not wanting to trigger World War III, and how they just did not understand his work. He just nodded, staring down at the soapy water, his reflection a pale ghost in the suds. Okay, I understand. That single okay carried the weight of a finalized divorce decree. I discovered months later that he had drafted a 6-page letter to my parents. He had poured his soul into explaining his craft, the centuries of history he was preserving, his financial stability, and his profound, unwavering devotion to me. He had written about the satisfaction of bringing dead things back to life, about the poetry of gears and springs, about the legacy he was building one tick at a time. He agonized over it for weeks, rewriting paragraphs, crumpling pages, starting over from scratch. But he never put it in the mail. When I finally asked him why, he offered a hollow shrug. What does it matter? They decided my worth the day I walked through their door. A letter is not going to change 30 years of programming. Staring at the ceiling that December night, a sickening realization washed over me. My silence was not a neutral shield. Every single time I let my mother's jab slide, every time I laughed off my father's dismissive comments, every time I changed the subject instead of defending my husband, I was subliminally teaching myself that Samuel was not worth fighting for. I was teaching myself that my marriage was less important than their comfort. Samuel deserved an advocate. I deserved an advocate. Our life together deserved to be defended with the same ferocity that Alexander defended his quarterly bonuses. Christmas Eve was exactly 14 days away. The annual expectation was that we would report to my parents' estate for the mandatory celebration. But this year was going to be radically different. The very next afternoon, I was sitting in my clinic across from a young patient named Lily. She was 27, hopelessly tethered to a man who systematically shredded her self-worth, piece by piece, over 3 years. She had come to me with trembling hands and a voice that barely rose above a whisper. He tells me I am completely irrational, Lily sobbed, digging her nails into her palms hard enough to leave crescent-shaped welts. He says I just cannot take constructive criticism. He says if I were a better partner, he would not have to raise his voice. He says I am lucky he stays with me because nobody else would put up with my mental issues. I leaned forward in my leather chair, my hands folded on my knees. Lily, when you remain silent in the face of psychological abuse, you are effectively teaching your own brain that you are not worth protecting. Every time you swallow the words you want to say, you reinforce the lie that his version of reality is the only version that matters. The sentence left my lips and my own stomach plummeted. It was like hearing a stranger's voice echo in my head, a stranger who knew exactly what she was talking about but could not apply the lesson to her own life. I was a massive hypocrite. I was dispensing survival tactics that I was too cowardly to employ in my own marriage. I was telling a battered woman to find her voice while I was silencing my own. Following the session, Dr. Eris, the brilliant, 62-year-old director of my behavioral clinic, waved me into his office. His walls were lined with diplomas and photographs of him receiving awards from organizations I had only ever read about in journals. He was a legend in the field, and he had personally mentored me for the past 5 years. Daphne, Stellar News, he smiled warmly, sliding a thick folder across his desk. Your intensive research paper on coercive control methodologies in high-net-worth relationships? The board selected it. You are officially the keynote speaker at the April symposium. They want you to present the full findings. The entire field is going to be there. I blinked, totally stunned. What? You earned this, Daphne. You are a top-tier behavioral analyst. One of the best I have trained in 30 years. Your work on the dynamics of financial abuse in seemingly perfect marriages is groundbreaking. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with those sharp, knowing eyes. You know, you're a fascinating case study yourself. You can diagnose a toxic power structure from 1,000 yards, but you cannot see the one you have been living in for 8 years. I froze. Dr. Eris. He held up a hand. I am not your therapist. I am your mentor. But I have watched you shrink yourself every time you mention a family gathering. I have seen the way your shoulders drop when you talk about your sister. You are brilliant, Daphne. But brilliance does not matter if you are too afraid to use it in your own life. I floated back to my office in a bizarre state of dissociation. Within the walls of this hospital, I was Dr. Daphne Hale, a respected behavioral expert specializing in toxic manipulation and coercive control. My research was cited in federal training manuals. Law enforcement agencies consulted me on domestic abuse cases. But the second I crossed the threshold of my parents' home, I reverted to a submissive child who allowed her husband to be treated like an absolute peasant. The cognitive dissonance was rotting me from the inside out, a slow poison I had been swallowing for 8 years. Dr. Eris had also handed me a highly confidential file that afternoon, a high-net-worth individual desperately seeking a private consultation for a complex domestic extraction. The intake form was sparse, just a name and a phone number and a note that said, "Urgent. Client is in immediate danger. Requires exit strategy within 90 days." I barely glanced at the details. I would vividly remember them later. That night, I made a concrete vow. This Christmas, I was done swallowing glass to keep my family comfortable. I was done letting them treat my husband like a second-class citizen. I was done pretending that their version of success was the only version that mattered. But I had no idea that my personal rebellion was about to violently collide with the horrific, festering secrets locked inside my sister's $4 million mansion. December 24th, 5:15 p.m. Samuel and I parked in my parents' sprawling driveway. LED icicle lights dripped from the gutters, casting a soft, blue-white glow over the fresh snow. A massive, frosted wreath dominated the heavy oak door, tied with a crimson velvet ribbon. Smoke curled from the chimneys. Classical Christmas music drifted faintly from inside. The ultimate illusion of the American dream, pristine and untouchable. "Are you ready for this?" Samuel asked, turning off the ignition. The engine ticked as it cooled, the only sound in the frozen quiet. "No, I never am." He reached into the back seat and grabbed his gift, a breathtaking, hand-tooled rosewood tea chest with intricate silver inlays depicting a forest scene. It was the product of a month of evening labor, every detail carved by hand, every joint fitted with the precision of a master craftsman. It was not just a gift, it was a piece of him. I reached out and grabbed his wrist. "Samuel, whatever goes down in that house tonight, I am standing between you and them. I am not going to let them say a single word without me pushing back. I am done being silent." He looked at me, a profound shift occurring in his dark eyes. It looked like shock. And then, slowly, it looked like a lifeline being thrown to a drowning man. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." The interior of the house was suffocatingly warm, smelling of cinnamon and roasted lamb and the faint, cloying sweetness of expensive perfume. My father was holding court near the fireplace, a crystal tumbler of scotch in his hand, his voice booming about some golf game he had played in Palm Springs. My mother was obsessively adjusting the crystal wine glasses on the dining table, moving each one a quarter inch to the left, then back to the right, then left again. And perfectly posed on the pristine white sectional, like mannequins in a luxury catalog, were Victoria and Alexander. Victoria was draped in a high-necked cashmere sweater in a shade of pale blush, a delicate string of pearls at her throat. Her hair was perfectly curled. Her makeup was flawless. But her smile was completely symmetrical, and that was precisely what made it terrifying. It felt hollow, like a porcelain doll painted slightly wrong, the kind of smile that did not reach the eyes. Alexander sprang up, radiating arrogant charisma. He was wearing a velvet smoking jacket, for God's sake, like he was auditioning for a period drama. "The little sister arrives," he boomed, wrapping me in a suffocating embrace that lasted exactly 1 second too long. "Still out there analyzing the crazies? Still trying to fix broken people?" My mother let out a bright, tinkling laugh from the dining room. "Alexander, behave yourself." But she was beaming at him, her face radiant with pride. Samuel offered his hand. Alexander gripped it for a fraction of a second, the exact way you would touch a wet sponge you were about to throw in the trash. "Samuel, still out here surviving, bro? Still playing with old broken things?" "Bro." The sheer condescension was physically palpable, a wave of heat against my skin. I turned to my sister. Victoria wrapped her thin arms around me in a rigid, robotic hug that felt like hugging a mannequin. When she pulled back, her eyes immediately darted to the floor, then to Alexander, then to the floor again. She had lost a shocking amount of weight since Thanksgiving. Her cheekbones were too sharp. Her collarbones jutted out beneath the cashmere. And right there, just barely peeking over the collar of her sweater, was a faint, yellowish shadow. A healing bruise, maybe a week or two old, just beginning to fade to the color of old parchment. Before my brain could fully process the discoloration, she sharply turned her back. "I need to go check on the appetizers," she mumbled, her voice flat, empty, a recording of a human being. "The caterers need instructions." A heavy, freezing dread anchored itself in my gut, dense as a stone. I did not know the full equation yet, but the variables were terrifying. The way she moved, the way she kept her body angled away from her husband, the way her shoulders hunched as if bracing for an impact that had come many times before. I did not know the full equation, but I was about to learn. Dinner commenced at 7. The lamb was flawless, glistening with a honey glaze that probably cost more than my first car. The conversation was a psychological minefield. Alexander engineered a massive corporate acquisition last week, my mother announced loudly, pouring a heavy pour of Pinot Noir into his glass. It was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. "Daphne, did you read it?" "I did not catch that one." "Well, you really need to keep up with current events. It is historical, truly historical." She gazed at Alexander like he was a deity descended from Mount Olympus. "Walk us through the negotiations, Alexander. Tell us how you did it." Alexander spent the next 12 minutes holding the table hostage with financial jargon, bragging about hostile takeovers and leveraged buyouts and corporate raiders. My father hung on every single syllable, nodding along like a disciple at the feet of a prophet. When Alexander finally finished his monologue, my dad turned his crosshairs onto Samuel. "So, Samuel, how is the little gear-turning hobby? People still paying for old clocks when we have iPhones and smartwatches and atomic time? Seems like a dying market to me." Samuel placed his fork down gently, the metal making no sound against the porcelain. "The restoration market is incredibly robust right now, Walter. Yes, business is thriving. There is a growing appreciation for craftsmanship, for things that were made by hand. People want objects that have history, that tell a story." "Thriving," Alexander echoed, violently swirling his wine glass, the deep red liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "Must be a nice, zero-stress gig. No board members breathing down your neck. No hostile takeovers. Just sitting in a shed with a magnifying glass, pretending you are a real craftsman." "It requires immense precision," Samuel replied, his tone remarkably calm, his eyes fixed on his plate. "It is just a different spectrum of pressure. The same focus, different application." "Right. Sure." Alexander flashed a predatory grin that did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. I glanced across the table at Victoria. She had meticulously sliced her lamb into microscopic cubes, a geometric grid of meat on her plate, but her lips had not touched a single piece. She was just dragging her fork through the mint jelly in a hypnotic trance, back and forth, her movements mechanical and empty. "Victoria, darling, you are looking far too thin," my mother noted with a slight frown, her eyes narrowing. "Alexander, you need to make sure this girl eats. She is wasting away." "She is on a strict juice cleanse," Alexander answered instantly, his voice smooth as oil. "She wants to be camera ready for the New Year's gala. You know how those society photographers are. They catch every imperfection." A terrifying micro-expression ripped across Victoria's face. It was there for a millisecond, then vanished, swallowed by the mask. "But I am a behavioral analyst. I study human terror for a living." The dilated pupils, the rigid jaw, the slight flinch of her shoulders, the way her fingers tightened around the fork until her knuckles were white. It was absolute, undeniable fear. My sister was utterly terrified of the man sitting next to her. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest, a sledgehammer of clarity. My hands gripped the edge of the mahogany table so hard the wood creaked. "Is that true, Victoria?" Alexander's head slowly rotated toward her, his eyes locking onto her profile with the focus of a predator watching prey. Victoria nodded frantically, staring a hole into her plate, her voice a hollow echo. Yes, just the cleanse. The nutritionist recommended it. I saw it. And suddenly, 8 years of bizarre behavior began snapping together like a horrific jigsaw puzzle. The weight loss. The isolation from friends. The way she never went anywhere without him. The way she asked permission before speaking. The way she flinched at sudden movements. It was all there, hidden in plain sight, and I had been too blind, too distracted by my own wounds, to see it. After dessert, we migrated to the living room. The grand Christmas tree dominated the bay window, a 12-foot Douglas fir smothered in ornaments collected over 4 decades. My mother reached for Samuel's gift first. She peeled back the wrapping paper with the same enthusiasm she might use to open a tax document and hoisted the heavy rosewood tea chest into her lap. She ran a finger over the silver inlay, tracing the carved trees. "Oh, wow," she sighed, her voice flat. "It is so quaint. Did you make this in the shed? It must have taken you ages." A master-crafted piece of functional art, months of painstaking labor, and she called it quaint. The Clara from yesterday would have smiled tightly and swallowed the insult. The Clara from yesterday was dead. It took him over 120 hours of highly specialized labor, Mom. My voice sliced through the room, loud and unyielding, sharp as a scalpel. If he sold that at his standard hourly rate, you are holding a $5,000 piece of inventory. That is not quaint. That is art. The living room flatlined. My father shifted uncomfortably in his wingback chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "Daphne, there is no need to be aggressive. Your mother was just making an observation." Wow, Alexander barked a harsh, mocking laugh. Someone forgot to take their meds today. Someone is feeling a little sensitive about the shed comment. I locked eyes with Alexander, refusing to blink. I am not aggressive. I am not sensitive. I am just correcting a wildly inaccurate assessment. You want to talk about financial success? That tea chest appreciated in value the moment it was completed. Your watch depreciated the second you walked out of the store. That is the difference between craft and consumption. Samuel's warm hand settled firmly on my knee. He was not trying to silence me. He was anchoring me, grounding me, letting me know he was there. My mother's jaw went slack. She had never, in 33 years, seen this version of her daughter. The daughter who stood up. The daughter who spoke. Suddenly, Victoria shot up from the sectional. She looked like she was about to vomit, her face pale, her hands trembling. I just need some fresh air," she stammered, bolting toward the sliding glass doors. "It is so hot in here. I cannot breathe." As she rushed past the coffee table, her iPhone slid out of her cardigan pocket and slammed onto the hardwood with a sharp crack. Alexander moved with terrifying speed. He lunged forward, snatched the device off the floor, and seamlessly dropped it into his own suit pocket. The motion was so fluid, so deeply ingrained in his muscle memory, it made my blood run cold. It was the movement of a man who had done this 100 times before, who had perfected the art of taking what was not his. Victoria did not stop. She did not turn around and ask for her property. She just slid the glass door open and vanished into the freezing snow, her shoulders hunched in absolute defeat, her thin cardigan no protection against the bitter wind. I watched Alexander lazily pat the pocket where his wife's phone was currently held hostage. And the clinical part of my brain, the part one had been trained to trust above all else, screamed, what kind of man physically intercepts his wife's communication? What kind of man confiscates her only connection to the outside world? An abuser. A controller. A monster in a velvet smoking jacket. Okay, I need to take a quick pause. If you have ever sat at a holiday dinner, feeling entirely invisible while the family narcissist soaked up all the glory, I see you. Tell me in the comments, have you ever hit your breaking point and completely shattered the piece? What was the fallout? And hey, if you are invested in this absolute train wreck, hit that subscribe button. The psychological warfare is just getting started. Back to the nightmare. My sister was freezing in the snow, and I was finally awake to the horror movie playing out in my parents' living room. I stepped out onto the patio. The bitter wind bit at my face, stealing my breath. Victoria was standing near the frozen swimming pool, her arms wrapped tightly around her chest, violently shivering, her breath pluming in the cold air. Victoria. She whipped around, aggressively wiping at her dry eyes, her face a mask of false composure. I am perfectly fine, Daphne. Just needed to cool down. The wine was too heavy. I am fine. I closed the distance between us. The yellow bruise creeping up her neck was impossible to ignore in the harsh glare of the security lights, a sickly bloom against her pale skin. Before I could formulate a sentence, my phone violently buzzed in my coat pocket. It was a text from an unsaved number. I cannot keep living this lie. We need to talk. I have to tell someone. I cannot do this alone anymore. Jay. I stared at the glowing screen. Jay, I did not have any clients or friends who would randomly text me a confession on Christmas Eve. I assumed it was a wrong number, a scammer, someone who had typed the wrong area code. But as my thumb hovered over the delete button, Victoria suddenly grabbed my elbow, her grip surprisingly strong. We need to get back inside right now, she whispered, her voice stripped of all emotion, a dead monotone. It sounded like a hostage reading a ransom script. Alexander is going to be incredibly upset if I am out of his sight for too long. He does not like it when I wander off. Upset. Not worried. Not curious. Upset. She had perfectly memorized the explosive triggers of her captor. She knew exactly what would set him off, and she was desperate to avoid it. Victoria, look at me. Look at me. Are you safe in that house? Is he hurting you? For one fleeting second, the immaculate mask shattered. Her eyes met mine, and I saw a bottomless well of exhaustion and desperate, suffocating panic. I saw 8 years of swallowed screams. I saw a woman who had been dying by inches. But just as quickly, the steel doors slammed shut. The mask reassembled. I have a perfect life, Daphne. A beautiful home. A successful husband. Everything Mom and Dad ever wanted for me. Let us go inside. We walked back into the warmth. As I stepped through the glass doors, Alexander was watching me like a hawk from the kitchen island. His eyes were dark, calculating, entirely devoid of the charming frat boy persona he projected. When he realized I was studying him, he plastered on a fake smile that did not reach his eyes. That strange text message was burning a hole in my pocket. I have to tell someone. It did not click until much later that I did not actually have Alexander's phone number saved in my contacts. We despised each other. We never texted. That desperate message was not a cry for help directed at me. He had typed in the wrong number. I just did not know who the intended recipient was yet. Inside the foyer, a few extended friends had arrived for dessert. Sarah, Victoria's former college roommate, was shaking snow off her boots, her cheeks flushed with cold. Come to think of it, I had not seen Sarah and Victoria in the same room for nearly 4 years. They had been inseparable in college. Now, Sarah was a stranger at a holiday party. Sarah pulled Victoria into a massive hug, the kind of hug that lasts a beat too long, that communicates more than words ever could. When Sarah finally pulled back, she whispered something frantic into Victoria's ear. Victoria gave a microscopic nod and instantly retreated back to Alexander's side on the couch, her body language screaming compliance. Sarah watched Victoria walk away, her face twisting in pure agony. She caught me staring. Daphne, walk with me for a second, Sarah muttered, grabbing my forearm with a grip like iron and pulling me into the darkened laundry room. She checked the hallway, her eyes scanning for eavesdroppers, before turning back to me. How is her mental state? Sarah's voice was a frantic, hushed whisper, her eyes wide with fear. Is she sleeping? Is she eating? Is she talking to anyone? I honestly do not know. She shuts me out. She always has. Sarah closed her eyes, her jaw trembling. She called me 14 months ago, 3 in the morning, sobbing hysterically. She was begging me to come get her. Begging me. She said she had nowhere else to go. Sarah swallowed hard, a tear escaping down her cheek. Then, at 7 a.m., she called back and told me she had a bad reaction to some wine and everything was perfect. She said she had been overreacting. She said she was fine. Get her from what, Sarah? From where? Sarah looked at the floor, her shoulders shaking. I work as an intake nurse at Seattle General ER. I am violating a massive HIPAA code by telling you this. I could lose my license. I could go to jail. She grabbed my shoulders, her face inches from mine. She came in with a fractured orbital bone, Daphne. A fractured eye socket. A domestic incident report was drafted by the hospital police. And then, 12 hours later, she completely retracted the statement and claimed she fell down the stairs. She said she was clumsy. She said it was her fault. All the blood drained from my head. The room started spinning, the walls closing in. Alexander hit her? Alexander did that to her. I cannot confirm anything else, Sarah pleaded, tears welling in her eyes, her voice cracking. But if you see a single red flag tonight, do not let her leave this house with him. She does not have the strength to save herself anymore. She has been hollowed out. Sarah slipped back into the hallway, leaving me standing in the dark, the horrifying reality finally settling into my bones. My sister was a battered wife. My brother-in-law was a monster. And nobody in this house, including me, had done a damn thing about it for 8 years. By 10:30 p.m., the holiday cheer had morphed into a drunken nightmare. Alexander had polished off half a bottle of Macallan. His face was flushed, his volume was dialed up, and the charming mask was completely gone, replaced by something ugly and raw. You know what you need to do, Samuel? Alexander slurred, leaning heavily against the granite counter, his words running together. You need to pivot to TikTok. Do some ASMR videos of you scrubbing old brass. Get a little camera, set it up in the shed, make some noise. That is the only way you are going to monetize that dead-end gig. That is how you make it in the modern economy. My father let out a booming laugh, his scotch sloshing in his glass. My mother offered a pathetic, enabling smile, her eyes flickering between Alexander and Samuel. Oh, Alexander, that is enough. Leave the poor boy alone. I am dead serious, Helen, Alexander pressed, waving his empty crystal glass, spilling a few drops onto the granite. In this economy? Playing Geppetto in a shed? It is embarrassing. Samuel, you are practically a charity case. You are a drain on your wife's potential. Alexander dramatically pulled back his cuff to expose his wrist. This Patek Philippe cost more than your entire annual gross. More than you will make in 5 years. More than you will ever see in your lifetime. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the hum of the refrigerator. The humiliation hung in the air like a thick fog, suffocating and toxic. Samuel slowly stood up. His face was a masterclass in stoic restraint. He did not yell. He did not throw a punch. He did not even raise his voice. He just looked at Alexander with profound pity, the kind of pity you reserve for a man who has everything and is still desperately unhappy. I am going to step out for some fresh air, Samuel said quietly. He walked past the kitchen island, his posture straight, his head high, completely unbothered by the barking dog behind him. But as he passed the hallway, I saw his shoulders slump just a fraction of an inch. The mask slipped for a moment, and I saw the exhaustion underneath. 8 years of endless psychological battery. And my family was applauding the abuser. Something inside my chest snapped. A steel cable of forced compliance, woven over decades, finally severed with an audible crack. I looked at Alexander's smug, punchable face. I looked at my father, wiping a tear of laughter from his eye. I looked at my mother, still smiling that pathetic, enabling smile. And I knew that if I did not burn this room to the ground right now, I would lose my soul. I would lose my marriage. I would lose everything that mattered. I stood up. My chair screeched violently against the hardwood, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Daphne, sit down, my father ordered, his amusement vanishing, replaced by irritation. Do not ruin the mood. It is Christmas Eve. I am entirely done protecting your mood, I projected, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings, bouncing off the crystal chandelier. You just sat there and gleefully participated in the humiliation of my husband, and you think this is a joke? You think this is acceptable? Oh, please, Daphne. My mother rolled her eyes, heavily irritated, waving her hand dismissively. We just want you to have the financial security that Victoria has. We are looking out for your future. We are trying to help you. Alexander slammed his glass onto the granite, the crystal cracking. The smugness was replaced by cold, aggressive dominance, his eyes narrowing. Let us strip away the delusions, Daphne, he sneered, spreading his arms wide. Your husband is a glorified handyman. Somebody had to inject some reality into this family. Somebody had to tell the truth. Alexander, please, Victoria whimpered from the couch, her voice barely audible. Just let it go. Please. It is Christmas. Alexander did not even acknowledge her existence. Victoria flinched, a full body, violent flinch, as if he had just raised a fist. Sarah, standing by the mantel, inhaled sharply, her hand flying to her mouth. My phone violently vibrated in my pocket. I yanked it out. It was the same unsaved number. Disregard the last message. Sent to the wrong contact. Delete it immediately. Do not read it. Do not mention it. Forget it. Alexander was staring at me from across the kitchen. The arrogant sneer had momentarily vanished, replaced by a flash of absolute, naked panic. He quickly shoved his hands into his pockets, his shoulders tensing. And that is when the final puzzle piece locked into place with a sickening click. The first text was not a cry for help. It was a careless, drunken mistake. Alexander was trying to confess something to someone else, and in his intoxicated state, he had selected the wrong D name in his phone. He was hiding something massive. Something big enough to destroy his immaculate reputation. Something that made him afraid of me. I looked at my sister, visibly trembling on the sofa, her arms wrapped around herself like a shield. I looked at the man who had fractured her face, who had confiscated her phone, who had spent 8 years systematically erasing her from existence. I did not care about the consequences anymore. Tonight, Alexander was going down. I marched out the back door to find Samuel, my boots crunching in the snow. But before I could reach the edge of the patio, heavy footsteps crunched in the snow behind me. Daphne. Alexander's voice was low, slurred, and terrifyingly intimate. Can we speak privately for a second? Just you and me, woman to man. I turned around. Samuel was watching us from the far end of the yard, his posture instantly turning defensive, his fists clenching at his sides. I held up a hand to signal him to stay put. Make it fast, Alexander. I do not have patience for your games tonight. Alexander invaded my personal space, his chest almost touching mine. The smell of scotch was overpowering, mixed with the sharp scent of expensive cologne. You think you are the victim here, he laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. You think your parents play favorites? You have no earthly idea what goes on behind closed doors in this family. You have no idea what I have to deal with. Enlighten me. Your flawless, fragile sister? He pointed a finger toward the house, his hand shaking slightly. She is a complete psychopath. She monitors my GPS. She checks my bank statements. She interrogates my assistant about my schedule. I cannot even grab a beer with my colleagues without her threatening to self-harm. I am a prisoner in my own home. I am trapped. I stared at his red-rimmed eyes, his flushed face, his trembling hands. This was not a confession of pain. It was a highly calculated, preemptive strike. He was setting the narrative. I had heard this exact monologue from dozens of abusive men in my clinic, word for word, gesture for gesture. They always blamed the victim. They always reversed the roles. You are a psychologist, right? Alexander leaned closer, grabbing my bicep, his fingers digging in. Then you know that the women are not always the victims. You know that men can be victims too. You know that there are two sides to every story. I did not flinch. I let my clinical training completely take over, my voice dropping to a cold, professional register. That sounds incredibly stressful, Alexander. Who is the primary name on your joint checking accounts? He blinked, thrown entirely off balance. What? You said Victoria monitors your finances. So her name is on the accounts, correct? She has equal access. His jaw worked, muscles pulsing. Well, no. I manage the capital because I have the financial background. I am the one who makes the money. But she. Does Victoria have her own independent credit card? A separate account that you cannot access. She does not need one. I provide. Why did Victoria abandon her piano career? I stepped into his space, forcing him to back up a step. Did she willingly quit the symphony, or did you slowly, systematically isolate her from her colleagues and her mentors until she gave up? Did you tell her they were a bad influence? Did you tell her they were jealous of her success? She chose to be a homemaker. Alexander's voice cracked, rising in volume, his face reddening. She wanted to support my career. She wanted to be a wife. I specialize in coercive control, Alexander. I literally write the academic papers on it. I train federal investigators to identify it. I stared dead into his soul, my voice dropping to a whisper. I have heard your exact script 1,000 times, from 1,000 abusers, and it never, ever comes from the victim. Alexander's face mutated into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The charming banker was gone. A violent predator was staring back at me, his eyes black with fury. You do not know what the hell you are talking about, you arrogant little. I gave her a perfect life, he screamed, his voice carrying over the wind, echoing off the neighbors' houses, cracking with desperate rage. I gave her everything. Everything she ever wanted. The sliding glass door shrieked open. Victoria was standing on the threshold, backlit by the warm living room lights. She looked like an avenging ghost, her face pale, her eyes blazing. Victoria. Alexander instantly dropped his voice, throwing his hands up in a placating gesture, the mask snapping back into place. Baby, it is freezing. Daphne and I were just debating. I heard you, Victoria said. Her voice was not shaking anymore. It was dead calm, flat, the voice of a woman who had nothing left to lose. I heard every single word. Behind her, my parents rushed to the door. Sarah was standing right behind them, her hand over her mouth. My mother's face was a mask of confusion and growing horror. Victoria, let us get you inside, Alexander cooed, taking a step toward her, his voice dripping with false concern. You are having another one of your paranoid episodes. You are exhausted. You have not been sleeping. You are not thinking clearly. Do not take another step toward me. Alexander froze. A terrifying flash of white-hot anger crossed his features before he instantly smoothed it over, but the mask was cracking. Honey, you are not taking your medication. You are not yourself. You need to come inside. She is not exhausted, Alexander, I said, stepping up beside my sister, taking her cold, trembling hand in mine. She is finally speaking the truth. My mother pushed through the doorway, frantically looking between us, her face pale. What on earth is happening out here? Alexander? Victoria? Someone tell me what is going on. Nothing is happening, Helen. Alexander flashed a desperate, charming smile, the smile that had closed 100 deals. Daphne is just trying to psychoanalyze everyone again. She is trying to drag us into her misery. She is projecting her own marital problems onto us. 8 years, Victoria's voice sliced through the freezing air like a scalpel. For 8 years, I have lived in a nightmare. The silence on the patio was absolute. Even the wind seemed to stop howling. My mother's hand went to her throat. My father's face drained of color. Victoria, honey, what are you saying? My father asked, his voice trembling. Victoria did not look at my dad. She locked eyes with Alexander. Then, she slowly rolled up the sleeves of her cashmere sweater. And then she unzipped the high neck. The gasps from my parents were simultaneous, a sharp, unified intake of breath. Her collarbone, her forearms, her biceps. They were covered in a horrific mosaic of violence. Yellowing bruises in various stages of healing. Deep purple contusions shaped like fingerprints. Faint, silvery scars that had long since healed. A historical timeline of physical torture, stretching back years. My mother slapped a hand over her mouth, letting out a guttural sob. Oh my God, Victoria. She did that to herself. Alexander shouted, sweat instantly beading on his forehead despite the freezing cold. I swear to God, Helen, she is psychotic. She hits herself to punish me. She has been doing it for years. She is crazy. He tracks my car, Victoria said, the dam finally breaking, the words pouring out in a torrent. He put a keylogger on my laptop. He installed cameras in the house. If I take longer than 15 minutes at the grocery store, he cancels my debit card while I am at the register. He has not let me see my friends in 4 years. He screens every phone call. He reads every text message. Victoria, shut your mouth. Alexander lunged forward. Samuel materialized out of the shadows, stepping directly between Alexander and my sister, his body a solid wall. He alienated me from everyone, Victoria cried, pointing a trembling finger at Sarah. I have not been allowed to be alone with my best friend in 4 years because he told me she was trying to destroy our marriage. He told me she was jealous. He told me she wanted to take me away from him. Sarah stepped out into the snow, tears streaming down her face, her voice cracking. She called me from the ER 14 months ago. She had a fractured eye socket. She was bleeding. She was terrified. He forced her to retract the police report by threatening to destroy her reputation and leave her with massive legal debt. He told her he would take everything. That is slander. Alexander roared, pointing at Sarah. You have zero proof of that. You are just a jealous, lonely woman trying to destroy my marriage. My father looked at Alexander. The immense admiration he had harbored for this man for 8 years violently evaporated, replaced by absolute disgust. His fists clenched at his sides. His jaw was rock hard. Alexander, my dad growled, his voice low and dangerous. Is any of this true? Alexander opened his mouth to deploy another lie, to spin another narrative, to twist the truth into something he could control. But he was interrupted. BZZZZ. 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 A phone was violently vibrating in Alexander's suit pocket. Not Victoria's phone. His personal phone. It was relentless. Call after call. Text after text. Someone was desperately trying to reach him. Answer it, my mother whispered, her face pale as a sheet, her voice hollow. Alexander swallowed hard, taking a step backward, his eyes darting toward the driveway. It is just the partners at the firm. We have an overseas merger happening. They need my approval on. Answer the damn phone, Alexander. My father roared, his voice shaking the glass panes of the house, the windows rattling in their frames. Alexander's hand trembled as he reached into his pocket. He pulled out the glowing device. The screen lit up the darkness, projecting the notifications for everyone in the immediate vicinity to see. It was not a managing partner. The contact name was Mia, and the notification preview read, I am not waiting anymore, Alexander. The baby is coming in May. You promised me you were leaving her tonight. I have been waiting 8 years. I am done. Call me. My mother's knees buckled. My father had to catch her by the waist to keep her from collapsing into the snow. Victoria let out a sharp, hysterical laugh, the sound cracking the frozen air. A baby, she gasped, covering her face with her hands. Of course. Of course you are having a baby. Of course there is someone else. Victoria, please listen to me. This is not what it looks like. Alexander was completely trapped, backing away like a cornered rat, his hands raised. I was going to sit you down. I was going to explain. I was going to. 8 years of isolating me, beating me, controlling what I eat and who I speak to and where I go and what I wear, Victoria screamed, her voice cracking with raw agony, tears streaming down her face. And you were playing house with another woman the entire time. You were building a whole other life. My wife is deeply unwell. Alexander spun toward my parents, desperately trying to salvage his godlike status, his eyes wild. She is crazy. You all know she is crazy. She has always been crazy. You have to believe me. She is not crazy, Alexander, Samuel's deep, calm voice echoed across the patio, solid as stone. But what you just attempted is textbook Darvo. Deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. My wife literally teaches seminars on it to federal investigators. You are not the first man to try that script. You will not be the last. Alexander's eyes darted wildly between me, Samuel, and my father. He was out of ammunition. The golden boy was dead. The illusion was shattered. There was nothing left to salvage. Get off my property. My father's voice was a low, dangerous rumble, the voice of a man who had finally woken up. He stepped squarely in front of Alexander, his chest inches from his son-in-law's face. The man who had worshipped Alexander an hour ago was now fully prepared to kill him. If you ever come within 50 feet of my daughter again, I will personally drag you to the police precinct myself. I will testify. I will do whatever it takes to put you away." Alexander's face contorted with demonic rage, his features twisting into something ugly and unrecognizable. But he was outnumbered, and he knew it. He pointed a trembling finger at my family, his hand shaking. "You are all going to regret this. Every single one of you. I will legally bury her. I will take everything she has. I will destroy her." He turned, stomped through the snow, and disappeared down the driveway. A minute later, the roar of his Porsche engine echoed through the neighborhood as he sped away into the night. The silence that descended on the backyard felt like the first breath of oxygen after nearly drowning. It was heavy and thick and absolute. Victoria's legs finally gave out. She collapsed onto a patio chair, burying her face in her hands, violently sobbing, her shoulders heaving. Sarah rushed to her side, wrapping her in a tight embrace, rocking her back and forth. I turned to my parents. My mother looked like she had aged 20 years in the span of 10 minutes, her face gaunt, her eyes hollow. My father was staring blindly at the frozen pool, his fists still clenched, his chest heaving. "I love both of you," I said, my voice eerily calm. "But tonight is the final time you will ever disrespect my husband. You built an altar to a monster, and you treated a truly good man like garbage because he did not have a fancy title. You worshipped the wrong person for 8 years." My mother looked up, tears pouring down her cheeks. "Daphne, we had no idea. We did not know about Alexander. We did not know about any of this." "I know you did not," I replied sharply, my voice cutting through the night. "But you knew exactly what you were doing to Samuel. You did it willfully. You did it deliberately. For 8 years. You called his work quaint. You called him a hobbyist. You dismissed everything he built. You did not need to know about Alexander to know you were cruel to my husband." My father finally looked at Samuel. The weight of 8 years of casual cruelty seemed to settle on his shoulders, pressing him down. We just wanted you girls to be secure. We were terrified of you struggling. We wanted you to have the kind of life we built. We were so afraid of you being poor that we forgot what actually mattered. "I have ultimate security," I said, grabbing Samuel's hand, feeling the warmth of his calloused fingers wrap around mine. "I am married to a man who builds beautiful things and has never once raised his voice to me. I am married to a man who sees me. Alexander could not buy that kind of safety with all the money on Wall Street. No amount of money can buy a good heart." My mother squeezed her eyes shut, a pathetic whimper escaping her throat. "I am so sorry. Daphne. Samuel. I am so deeply sorry. I was so blind. I was so focused on appearances. I wanted the world to see us as successful, and I lost sight of what success actually means." It was the first time I had ever heard her apologize in my entire life. Samuel did not gloat. He did not demand a groveling apology. He did not list the litany of insults he had endured. He simply looked at my broken sister, shivering in the cold, and did what he had always done. He offered. "Victoria," Samuel said softly, his voice gentle. "Our apartment is not a mansion. But our guest room is warm, and the door locks, and you are welcome to stay there for as long as you need. As long as you want." Victoria looked up at the man her family had relentlessly mocked for 8 years. The tinkerer. The shed dweller. The man who was now offering her the only safe harbor she had left. "Thank you," she wept, her voice cracking. "Thank you." Our apartment was compact. A small Seattle 2-bedroom, filled with vintage clocks and furniture Samuel had salvaged and restored from junk piles. Every piece had a story. Every piece had been saved from the landfill and given new life. Victoria stood in our hallway looking around as if she had just landed on Mars. "Mom used to make jokes about how tiny your place was," Victoria whispered, touching the polished wood of a mantel clock, her fingers tracing the grain. "She used to say you were slumming it. She was so blind. She could not see what you actually had." I guided her to the sofa, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Samuel quietly brewed a pot of chamomile tea and set it on the coffee table, the cups arranged on a hand-carved tray he had made years ago. He handed her a steaming mug, offered a warm smile, and retreated to our bedroom to give us space. 8 years, Victoria muttered, staring into the tea, watching the steam rise. I threw away my entire youth on a monster. I gave him everything. I gave him my career, my friends, my dreams, my body. And he was building a life with someone else the whole time. I sat next to her, pulling a blanket over her shoulders. You survived a monster. There is a massive difference between throwing away and surviving. You did not throw anything away. You fought to stay alive. That is not weakness. That is everything. Victoria looked toward the bedroom where Samuel had disappeared. Why is he treating me with such kindness? After the way Alexander and my parents degraded him? After all those years of listening to them mock him, why is he being kind to me? Because Samuel knows exactly who he is, I said softly. He does not need to destroy other people to feel powerful. He builds things. He restores things. He brings dead things back to life. That is who he is. That is what he does. That night, for the first time in nearly a decade, my sister slept without jumping at every creak of the floorboards. She slept without checking her phone for tracking alerts. She slept without fear. 2 months later, I was sitting in a local cafe waiting for my mother. We were meeting on neutral territory. No mansions. No judgments. No grand pianos or crystal chandeliers. She arrived looking significantly softer. Less manicured. More human. She slid into the booth across from me and immediately handed me a sealed envelope, her hands trembling slightly. What is this? I asked, turning it over. I found it in the glove box of your old car, years ago, she confessed, staring at her coffee cup. I was cleaning it out before we sold it. I found the envelope and I opened it. I should not have, but I did. I opened the flap. Inside was Samuel's 6-page, handwritten letter. The one he never sent. The one he had agonized over for weeks. The one he had crumpled and rewritten and never put in the mail. You read this? I asked, my chest tightening, my throat constricting. I did, my mother admitted, a tear escaping her eye, tracing a path down her cheek. I knew exactly what kind of man he was years ago. I knew he was devoted to you. I knew he was talented. I knew he was good. I was just too proud and too terrified to admit I was wrong. She took a shaky breath. Your father, before the real estate business took off, before we had any money, he was a struggling mechanic. We almost lost our home twice. We ate beans out of a can for months. I was so traumatized by financial panic that when I saw Samuel working with his hands, I projected all my terror onto you. I saw him and I saw our worst years. I could not see who he actually was. Your fear does not excuse your cruelty, Mom. It explains it, but it does not excuse it. I know, she whispered, tears flowing freely now. I have to live with that. I have to live with the fact that I pushed Victoria into the arms of a sociopath because I cared more about his W-2 than his character. I have to live with the fact that I spent 8 years tearing down a man who was building something beautiful. I have to live with all of it. The fallout from Christmas Eve was absolute. It was a forest fire that burned everything to ash. Alexander's mistress, Mia, was furious that he would not leave his wife. She marched straight into the hedge fund's HR department and filed a massive grievance, exposing severe professional misconduct, including the misuse of client funds and fraudulent reporting. The board forced Alexander into an immediate resignation to avoid a public scandal. He lost his partnership, his reputation, his golden boy status, and his career. He lost everything he had built his identity on. Victoria retained a shark of a divorce attorney recommended by Sarah. Because of the documented medical records from the ER and Alexander's desperate need to keep the abuse out of the press, Victoria secured a heavily favorable settlement. She walked away with enough money to buy a modest, beautiful condo in the city. More importantly, she purchased a grand piano, the same model she had played in the symphony, and started composing music again. The music came back slowly at first, hesitant notes, but then it flowed, and she played for hours, rediscovering the person she had been before she was erased. And Samuel? The historic estate restoration project he had been secretly working on was actually a massive commission for a boutique luxury hotel chain in Europe. They contracted him to restore over 60 antique timepieces for their flagship property. It was a life-altering payday, the kind of contract that established a reputation for a generation. I did not breathe a word of the financial windfall to my parents. That was not the point. The point was that he had been doing extraordinary work all along, and they had been too blind to see it. But a design magazine ran a feature on the hotel's interior architecture, prominently highlighting Samuel's work. There was a full-page photograph of him standing beside a restored 18th-century grandfather clock, his hands resting on the brass casing, a quiet smile on his face. My father saw the article. He called Samuel directly. I saw the spread, my dad had said, his voice thick with emotion. That 18th-century grandfather clock, it is an absolute masterpiece, Samuel. The detail work is incredible. The restoration is flawless. I had no idea you were working at that level. Samuel just smiled when he relayed the conversation to me. He is trying, Samuel said. And that is a start. It is more than I ever expected. In April, I stood at the podium of the National Behavioral Symposium. I looked out over a crowd of hundreds of clinical psychologists and federal advocates, their faces expectant. Coercive control is a silent epidemic. I projected into the microphone, my voice rock steady, echoing through the auditorium. We are trained to admire the immaculate house, the prestigious career, the curated perfection. But we are rarely trained to spot the hostage trapped inside. We look at a woman with a diamond ring and a waterfront estate, and we assume she is safe. We assume she is lucky. We assume she has everything. In the front row, Samuel was beaming at me, his eyes bright. Sitting to his right was Victoria, looking healthier and more radiant than she had in a decade, color in her cheeks, life in her eyes. And right next to them, against all odds, sat my parents. My mother was holding my father's hand. They were both listening. When my keynote concluded, the applause was thunderous, a wave of sound that seemed to go on forever. But I only cared about the interaction happening at the edge of the stage. My father walked up to Samuel. He did not offer a dismissive pat on the back. He did not make a joke about gear oil. He extended his hand and delivered a firm, respectful, eye-to-eye handshake. The kind of handshake reserved for equals, for colleagues, for men who have built something worth respecting. Today, our family is entirely recalibrated. We still have awkward dinners. There are still moments where my mother starts to pass judgment, starts to compare, starts to measure worth by the wrong metrics. But she catches herself. She stops. She apologizes. The difference is, I now have an impenetrable boundary. If the disrespect begins, I simply walk out the door. I do not argue. I do not explain. I just leave. And they have learned that my presence is a privilege, not a right. Yesterday, my mother stopped by our apartment. She was carrying a heavy, wrapped box, her hands trembling slightly. When I opened it, I found the 18th century French carriage clock Samuel had built 8 years ago. The one she had called quaint. The one she had left on the side table, ignored, while she worshipped Alexander's watch. This belongs in your home, she told me softly, her eyes downcast. It always did. I am sorry it took me so long to bring it back. I placed the clock on our mantel, next to a photograph of Samuel and me on our wedding day. It looked right there. It looked like it had always belonged. My parents wasted nearly a decade measuring human worth by bank accounts and luxury cars and the size of a house. They completely ignored the only metric that actually dictates a successful life. Does the person you love make you feel completely safe? Does he see you? Does he build you up instead of tearing you down? Samuel makes me feel safe. He makes me feel fiercely protected. He makes me feel seen. And that is a currency Alexander could never afford. That is a currency no amount of money can buy. You do not owe your family an apology for demanding respect. You do not owe them your silence to protect their comfortable illusions. You do not owe them your peace so they can keep pretending. Draw your boundary in concrete. Write it in stone. If they refuse to respect it, let them stay on the other side. You do not need to burn the bridge. You just need to stop crossing it. If you made it to the end of this journey, thank you. I genuinely appreciate you holding space for my family story. Have you ever had to sever ties or set a brutal boundary with a toxic family member? How did you survive the fallout? What did you build on the other side? Drop your experience in the comments. Your story might be the exact lifeline someone else needs to read today. And if this video struck a chord with you, please share it with a friend who needs to hear it. Check out the next video on the screen for more. Stay safe, trust your gut, and I will see you in the next one.